The one thing nobody tells you about Carl Jung's discovery of the rarest personality type is that he found people who carry a burden so profound, most of the population literally cannot comprehend how they experience reality. If you don't know this, you'll keep wondering why you feel like an alien in human skin, why your insights isolate you, why explaining your inner world feels impossible. But once you understand it, you'll realize that what you thought made you broken actually makes you invaluable. I'm going to show you exactly what Jung discovered about the rarest of all 16 personality types, plus the 4 developmental stages they must navigate to survive their own consciousness. And the most important part? The integration method Jung himself used when this pattern nearly destroyed him. I'm revealing that near the end. But first, you need to understand why Jung called studying this type dangerous, because without this context, you might spend your entire life trying to fix something that was never broken. The case that revealed this pattern began with a patient who walked into Jung's office in 1913, claiming they could see patterns in human behavior that others dismissed as coincidence. This wasn't psychosis. This wasn't grandiosity. This person could predict interpersonal dynamics with unsettling accuracy. Jung noticed something that shattered his assumptions about how human consciousness operates. The patient wasn't guessing. They were reading layers of reality that Jung himself, despite his training, had to strain to perceive. They described experiencing other people's emotional states as if those states were weather systems moving through a room. They explained how they could feel the unspoken dynamics between strangers across a crowded space. They talked about knowing things they had no logical way of knowing. But here's what made this case different from everything Jung had seen before. This person wasn't seeking help because their ability was malfunctioning. They were seeking help because the ability was working perfectly, and it was destroying them. The patient described a specific torture, seeing everything about people, their motivations, their self-deceptions, their hidden pain, and having no one believe them when they tried to explain what they saw. Worse, when they did share their insights, people felt exposed, violated, angry. The patient had learned that their greatest gift made them fundamentally alone. Jung realized he wasn't treating a disorder. He was witnessing what happens when a human consciousness develops sensory and processing capabilities that 98% of the population will never possess. He was looking at what he would later term the introverted intuitive type, and more specifically, the rarest configuration, the INFJ. Now here's where it gets interesting. Jung didn't just categorize this type and move on. He became obsessed with understanding why these individuals seemed to carry a specific kind of suffering that other types didn't experience. But here's the part that will surprise you. What Jung discovered was that this wasn't actually about having better intuition or deeper empathy. It was about having a fundamentally different operating system for processing reality. The INFJ brain, according to Jung's observations and modern neuroscience, doesn't just think differently. It literally constructs reality differently. Modern research into the INFJ cognitive stack reveals something extraordinary. Their dominant function, introverted intuition, creates what neuroscientists call pattern recognition at the subconscious level. Their brains are constantly, involuntarily, connecting disparate pieces of information into coherent wholes. They don't choose to see patterns. They can't stop seeing them. Jung wrote, the introverted intuitive type perceives all the background processes of consciousness with almost the same distinctness as the extroverted sensation type perceives external objects. For intuition, therefore, unconscious images acquire the dignity of things. But that's just the surface level. Wait until you see what happens when this pattern recognition combines with their secondary function, extroverted feeling. This creates a human being who not only sees the hidden architecture of situations, but feels compelled to harmonize and heal the systems they perceive. Think about the last time you walked into a room where two people had just finished arguing, but were pretending everything was fine. Most people might sense slight tension. The INFJ experiences that tension as a tangible force, reads the exact nature of the conflict from micro-expressions and energy shifts, understands both perspectives, predicts 3 possible outcomes, and feels an almost physical compulsion to resolve the disharmony. All of this happens in about 4 seconds, completely involuntarily. And this explains something that most people never realize. The INFJ isn't choosing to be intense, deep, or complex. They're trying to function in a world that operates on a completely different frequency than their natural perception. Stop and think about this for a second. If you're watching this and something is resonating at a level that feels almost uncomfortable, that recognition itself is data. The rarest types recognize themselves not through identification, but through finally being seen. Everything I just explained, most people miss the deeper implication. Having this consciousness pattern in a world where 98% of people don't share it creates a very specific psychological crisis that Jung identified as uniquely dangerous. Jung identified 4 distinct developmental stages that INFJs move through, and here's what terrified him most. Each stage holds the potential for either transcendence or complete psychological dissolution. There's no middle ground with this type. They either integrate their gift or it consumes them. Stage 1. The confused empath. This typically occurs in childhood and adolescence. The young INFJ knows they're different but doesn't have language for it. They experience overwhelming input from their environment, observing emotions and dynamics like a sponge with no ability to wring itself out. They often believe something is wrong with them. Jung wrote, "The child notices nothing, or only what fear demands it should notice. It remains in a condition of complete projection without consciousness of self." Here's what this looks like in real life. A 7-year-old INFJ comes home from school exhausted, not from learning, but from managing the emotional states of everyone around them. They knew their teacher was upset about something before class started. They felt the anxiety of the kid who forgot their homework. They absorbed the social tension between the 2 groups at lunch. They did all of this without trying, without wanting to, without any framework for understanding why they felt drained while other kids seemed fine. But here's what nobody tells you about this stage. The coping mechanisms developed here become the prison bars later. Many INFJs learn to hide, to minimize, to make themselves smaller. They learn that sharing what they perceive makes people uncomfortable, so they stop sharing. This self-silencing becomes so habitual that by stage 2, they've forgotten they're doing it. Stage 2, the conscious outcast. Usually emerging in late adolescence through the 20s, this stage is characterized by full awareness of being different combined with active suffering because of it. The INFJ now knows they see what others don't, and this knowledge isolates them further. Now watch what happens when they try to form intimate relationships at this stage. They meet someone, and within 3 conversations, the INFJ has built a complete psychological profile of this person. They see the person's wounds, their potential, their self-sabotage patterns, their deepest fears. The other person is still deciding if they like the INFJ's taste in music. This creates what Jung called the prophet's burden. The INFJ knows how the relationship will unfold. They can see the incompatibilities, the growth opportunities, the likely ending, but they can't explain how they know this without sounding presumptuous or unstable. So they either suppress their knowing and enter relationships that their intuition already told them won't work, or they trust their knowing and remain alone, and the pattern gets even more disturbing. At stage 2, many INFJs discover they can mirror people with uncanny precision. Their extroverted feeling allows them to become what others need them to be. This sounds like a superpower until you realize what it costs. The INFJ can be so convincing in their mirroring that they lose track of who they actually are beneath the adaptations. Stage 3, the disillusioned mystic. This is where it becomes dangerous. Usually hitting in the late 20s through 40s, Stage 3 INFJs have tried to live according to others' expectations and found it spiritually annihilating. They've dumbed themselves down, hidden their insights, pretended to be normal, and it nearly killed something essential in them. Jung described this stage in his own life during his confrontation with the unconscious after his break with Freud. He wrote, "An incessant stream of fantasies had been released, and I did my best not to lose my head, but to find some way to understand these strange things. I stood helpless before an alien world." But stage 3 holds a secret that Jung almost didn't publish. This is the stage where the INFJ either breaks completely or discovers something that saves them, the realization that they were never meant to fit into the world as it exists. They were meant to see beyond it, and, through that seeing, help transform it. Here's what this transformation looks like. A stage 3 INFJ stops apologizing for their depth. They stop trying to explain their knowing to people who aren't equipped to understand it. This is the stage where the INFJ either breaks completely or discovers something that saves them, the realization that they were never meant to fit into the world. They start using their pattern recognition not to fit in, but to create, to heal, to build systems that serve human wholeness. They become counselors, writers, artists, spiritual teachers, strategists, not because these careers chose them, but because these are the only containers large enough for what they perceive. The danger here is spiritual bypassing. The stage 3 INFJ can become so focused on transcendence, on serving others, on their mission, that they neglect their physical needs, their boundaries, their human limitations. They can martyr themselves on the altar of their own vision. Understanding these patterns is crucial, but there's one more stage you need to know before we get to Jung's integration method. If this matches your experience, pause and drop "I see the pattern" in the comments right now. Stage 4, the integrated seer. This is the rarest configuration of the rarest type. Most INFJs never reach stage 4 because it requires something almost impossible, fully accepting that you will never be fully understood by most people, and finding peace in that reality rather than resentment. The stage 4 INFJ has transmuted their isolation into sovereignty. They no longer need validation for what they perceive. They've developed discernment about when to share their insights and when to remain silent. They've learned to translate their complex inner knowing into language and frameworks that others can access. But they no longer collapse when those translations are rejected or misunderstood. Jung himself reached stage 4 in his later years. After his break with Freud, his Red Book period, his confrontation with the unconscious, he emerged with something revolutionary, a framework that explained not just his own strange consciousness, but provided a map for others like him. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For the INFJ, becoming who they truly are means accepting that they're not broken versions of normal people. They're prototypes of something else entirely. Now, everything I just told you, there's one exception that changes everything. Not every person who resonates with this description is actually an INFJ. There's a crucial difference between genuine introverted intuition dominance and trauma-induced hypervigilance that mimics it. Many people who've experienced childhood trauma develop heightened pattern recognition and empathy as survival mechanisms. This is real, valid, and can look identical to the INFJ experience from the outside. The difference lies in the source and the solution. Trauma-based hypervigilance can heal and integrate through therapeutic work, allowing the person to choose when to engage their heightened perception. True introverted intuition dominance doesn't turn off. It's not a wound response. It's the foundational architecture of consciousness for that individual. But Jung uncovered something that goes even deeper, and this is where most people completely misunderstand what it means to be this type. The INFJ's greatest gift isn't their intuition. It isn't their empathy. It's their capacity to hold and integrate paradox. Here's what transformed Jung's entire understanding of this type. During his own descent into the unconscious, documented in the Red Book, Jung discovered that the ability to perceive multiple layers of reality simultaneously, what creates such suffering for the INFJ, is actually preparation for a very specific psychological task. The INFJ consciousness is structured to perceive the shadow and the light in all things at once. They see your potential and your self-sabotage. They see the beauty in broken systems and the rot in seemingly perfect ones. They hold awareness of both the individual's free will and the deterministic patterns that constrain it. This isn't confusion. It's stereoscopic vision for psychological truth. Jung wrote, "The privilege of absurdity to which no living creature is subject, but man only. And of all the sorrows wherewith man is overcharged, no one torments him more than this one, that he should know so much and have so little power to control." This creates what Jung termed the transcendent function, the ability to hold tension between opposites without collapsing into one pole or the other. For most people, this is a skill they must develop through years of inner work. For the INFJ, it's the default setting. They can't not see both sides. But the most dangerous aspect of this gift, I'm saving that for just a moment, because once you understand it, everything about the INFJ experience makes terrible, perfect sense. The paradox holding capacity means INFJs are natural systems thinkers. They don't just see people, they see the systems people exist within. They don't just see problems, they see the multiple causes creating the problem, and the ripple effects any solution would create. This makes them invaluable in contexts that require holistic thinking, organizational development, therapeutic work, social justice, spiritual teaching, strategic planning. They can hold complexity that makes other types' heads spin, but it also makes simple things incredibly difficult. Imagine being asked, "Where do you want to go for dinner?" Your brain instantly generates a multi-layered analysis. What would each person in the group genuinely enjoy, not just say they enjoy? What can people afford without financial stress? Who has dietary restrictions they might not mention? What atmosphere would serve the emotional needs of the group right now? What are the long-term relationship implications of each choice? This happens in seconds, involuntarily. For a question that most people answer with "I don't care," you pick. The INFJ can't access "I don't care." Every choice contains meaning, creates consequences, affects the system. This isn't overthinking. This is accurate thinking that the situation doesn't require. And here's the part that will really change how you see this. The INFJ's suffering isn't caused by their perception being wrong. It's caused by their perception being right in a world that doesn't want to see what they see. Now here's where it becomes critical. The ability to see everything, to feel everything, to know things you have no logical basis for knowing. This can become its own form of psychological fragmentation if the INFJ doesn't learn what Jung called conscious containment. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The INFJ's gift can become their shadow in very specific ways. Here are the signs, and pay close attention to number 3, because this one catches almost everyone. First, the savior complex. Because the INFJ can see people's potential so clearly, they can become obsessed with helping others reach that potential. They can see exactly what someone needs to heal, grow, transform. The shadow side is, they start trying to force that transformation, managing people's lives, becoming martyrs to others' growth while neglecting their own needs. They mistake their vision of someone's potential for that person's actual desire to change. I've watched this destroy INFJ after INFJ. They pour themselves into someone who isn't ready, willing, or interested in the growth the INFJ can see so clearly. The INFJ thinks, if I just explain it better, if I just help more, they'll see. But seeing potential doesn't create the will to actualize it. The INFJ burns out, grows resentful, feels betrayed by someone who never actually asked to be saved. Second, destructive perfectionism. Because the INFJ can envision ideal outcomes with such clarity, reality constantly disappoints them. They see the gap between what is and what could be, and that gap becomes suffering. They apply this to themselves most brutally. They see their own potential with excruciating clarity, and every moment they're not living up to it feels like failure. This creates paralysis. The project isn't started because it can't be executed as perfectly as the vision. The relationship is abandoned because it doesn't match the ideal. The INFJ becomes trapped between a perfect vision and an imperfect reality, unable to accept that imperfection is the price of manifestation. Third, and this is the one that catches almost everyone, insight addiction. Because the INFJ's identity becomes built around seeing what others miss, they can become addicted to the role of seer, prophet, understander. They need to be the one with the deepest insight, the most complex analysis, the most profound understanding. This isn't ego in the traditional sense. It's existential terror masquerading as spiritual superiority. Here's what's really happening. If the INFJ's value comes from their unique perception, then being ordinary means being worthless. If anyone can see what they see, then what's their purpose? This creates a perverse investment in maintaining their own isolation. They need to be misunderstood to feel special. They need to be different to feel valuable. I've watched INFJs sabotage genuine connections because the other person understood them too easily. If someone gets them, really gets them, without the INFJ having to perform their complexity, it triggers terror. Their entire identity was built on being incomprehensible. Being comprehended feels like annihilation. But there's a way to avoid all of these traps, and it starts with understanding what Jung himself had to learn the hard way. The path forward is what Jung described as individuation, but for the INFJ, this process looks different than for other types. And this brings us to the most important piece, the integration method that saved Jung during his darkest period and provides the template for the INFJ's wholeness. Before I show you this method, let me ask you something. What if the entire framework of trying to be understood is the trap? What if the INFJ's freedom doesn't come from finally finding people who understand them, but from no longer needing to be understood to feel whole? Because what I'm about to share changed everything for Jung himself, and it's the inverse of what most INFJs spend their lives seeking. Remember what I said at the beginning about Jung discovering a pattern that either destroys you or transforms you. Here's the truth that Jung discovered through his own psychological crisis. The INFJ's integration doesn't come from finding their tribe, getting recognition for their gifts, you finally being appreciated for their depth. It comes from developing what Jung called relationship with the self, capital S. This is different from relationship with others, with society, with any external validation. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." What Jung realized during his Red Book period, when his own intuitive visions threatened to overwhelm him, was that the INFJ must become the container for their own vast perception. They can't keep trying to pour their inner ocean into the teacups of others' understanding. They must build an internal vessel large enough to hold what they see, without needing external validation that they're seeing it correctly. This is why meditation, journaling, artistic expression, and depth psychology work aren't optional for INFJs. They're survival mechanisms. The INFJ must have practices that allow them to process and integrate the massive amount of information and feeling they absorb. Without these practices, they become flooded, fragmented, overwhelmed. Jung's method was active imagination, a practice where he dialogued with the figures and forces arising from his unconscious. He didn't just think about his visions. He engaged with them, gave them voice, let them teach him. This practice allowed him to have relationship with the depths of his own psyche rather than being drowned by them. For the modern INFJ, this translates into several specific practices. Writing that isn't for publication or sharing, just for processing. Art that doesn't need to be good, just expressive. Movement that lets the body release what the mind is holding. Time in nature that provides respite from human emotional fields. Therapy or spiritual direction that offers genuine witness without trying to fix or minimize what the INFJ perceives. But here's the crucial piece that ties everything together. The INFJ must learn to distinguish between their intuition and their anxiety. This sounds simple, but it's the work of a lifetime. True intuition, what Jung called perception via the unconscious, has a quality of clarity and neutrality. It shows you what is without emotional charge. It's information. Anxiety masquerading as intuition has urgency, catastrophizing, and requires immediate action to discharge the discomfort. Many INFJs spend years following what they think is intuition, but is actually anxiety about not using their intuition correctly. They make themselves crazy trying to interpret every feeling, every hunch, every subtle perception. They turn their gift into a burden by demanding it perform for them constantly. The integrated INFJ learns to let intuition arise naturally without grasping for it. They trust that what they need to see will be shown to them without forcing the vision. This requires profound surrender, and it's the hardest thing for the INFJ to learn because their identity is so wrapped up in seeing. Now that you understand the integration path, here's exactly how to apply it in 3 specific contexts. In relationships, the INFJ must practice what I call conscious restraint of insight. Just because you see someone's wound, pattern, or potential doesn't mean you're obligated to share it. In fact, most of the time, sharing it serves your need to be seen as perceptive more than it serves the other person's growth. Instead, hold what you see with compassion and let people reveal themselves in their own timing. Your job isn't to speed up everyone's development. Your job is to create safe space where development can occur naturally. This means learning to be with people without fixing them, a nearly impossible task for the INFJ, but absolutely essential for sustainable relationships. And here's the mistake most people make in this context. They think holding back their insights is being inauthentic. It's not. It's having appropriate boundaries around your gift. You don't walk into someone's house and rearrange their furniture just because you can see a better layout. The same applies to people's psyches. In work, the INFJ must find or create roles that allow them to use their systemic perception and depth without requiring them to simplify or justify their process constantly. This usually means some form of self-employment, consulting, creative work, or specialized roles within organizations that value complexity. The INFJ in a conventional corporate role, trying to explain why they know a strategy will fail before it's implemented, without being able to show their work because the work is intuitive pattern recognition, this is torture. It's like asking a symphony to play through a phone speaker. The medium destroys the message. But watch what happens when you combine this with the INFJ's extroverted feeling. When they find work that aligns with their values and allows them to serve human well-being while using their perceptive gifts, they become unstoppable. They can work with intensity that burns out other types because the work isn't draining them. It's channeling their natural overflow into form. In self-care, the INFJ must protect their energy with the same fierceness that others protect their money. This means becoming extremely selective about where they invest their attention, who they spend time with, what media they consume, what environments they inhabit. Because the INFJ absorbs everything, they must curate everything. A violent movie that another type shakes off in an hour can haunt the INFJ for days. A friend's crisis that another type offers sympathy for and moves on from can colonize the INFJ's consciousness for weeks. An unjust system that another type can acknowledge and compartmentalize can fill the INFJ with rage that has nowhere to go. Jung wrote, "The healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into torturers." The INFJ must learn that protecting their peace isn't selfish. It's the prerequisite for doing their real work in the world. You can't serve from depletion. You can't hold space for others if you haven't held space for yourself. Now, remember the transcendent function, the ability to hold paradox? This reflects both ways in the INFJ's development. Every insight you have about others is simultaneously an insight about yourself. When you see someone's shadow, you're seeing it because you know that shadow from the inside. When you recognize someone's gift, you're recognizing it because that gift exists in you, even if in different form. This is Jung's concept of projection and the foundation of his work. The external world is a mirror for the internal world. For the INFJ who sees so much in others, this principle is especially important. Your perception of others is data about your own unconscious. And this leads to the final transformation, what Jung called the union of opposites. And for the INFJ, this takes a very specific form. The true purpose of understanding your nature as an INFJ isn't to feel special, different, or spiritually superior. It's to stop fighting yourself. It's to accept that you were built to see what others miss, and that this capacity will always set you apart, and that setting apart is neither punishment nor prize. It just is. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." The foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering. This consciousness fundamentally shifts how you move through the world. You stop trying to convince others that you see what you see. You either find the rare individuals who can meet you in that depth, or you accept that most connections will be partial, and that partial connection is still valuable. You stop resenting your gift for making life harder. You recognize that you weren't designed for an easy life. You were designed for a meaningful one, and meaning requires the capacity to see and hold complexity. You stop waiting for permission to be fully yourself. You accept that full self-expression will always be too much for some people, and you let those people go with love rather than contortion. I watched this transformation in a client who came to me desperate, depressed, convinced she was fundamentally broken. She was 43 and had spent her entire life trying to be normal, trying to fit, trying to tone down what she called her intensity. She'd been in relationships with people who told her she was too much, too sensitive, too deep. She'd worked jobs that valued efficiency over insight. She'd nearly erased herself trying to be acceptable. And this brings us full circle to the case study I mentioned at the beginning. After 8 months of working with Jung's individuation framework, specifically adapted for the INFJ pattern, here's what happened. She stopped apologizing. She started a private practice as a trauma therapist, specializing in complex cases that other therapists found too difficult. She ended a relationship that required her to stay small and spent a year alone, building relationship with herself. She created art that expressed her inner vision without needing it to be understood. She found a small group of people who could meet her depth and stopped trying to force depth with people who weren't capable of it. She wrote me a letter that said, "I spent 40 years thinking I was broken because I could see what others couldn't. Now I realize I was only broken when I pretended I couldn't see. My wholeness requires my sight, even when that sight isolates me. I'd rather be alone and whole than partnered and fragmented." Jung wrote about this kind of transformation. Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. This embodies Jung's discovery that the INFJ's journey isn't about finding the external world that accepts them. It's about building an internal world vast enough to house their perception, strong enough to withstand the isolation that perception sometimes creates, and generous enough to share their gifts without demanding recognition in return. So let me answer the question I posed at the very beginning. Is being the rarest personality type a curse or a gift? It's neither. It's a responsibility. Your pattern recognition, your depth, your capacity to see the unseen, this isn't meant to make your life comfortable. It's meant to make your life purposeful. You weren't designed to fit into systems as they exist. You were designed to see beyond those systems and help birth new ones. You're not too sensitive because you absorb others' emotions. You're exactly as sensitive as your purpose requires. The question isn't how to become less sensitive. The question is how to build a life that honors your sensitivity as sacred, rather than treats it as something to manage. The real question was never, why am I like this? Or, how do I become normal? The real question is, now that I know I'm built this way, how do I use this structure to serve what wants to be born through me? And the answer is, you stop hiding. You stop minimizing. You stop trying to translate your depth into shallow language. You find or create contexts that need your whole self, and you show up there without apology. Jung's individuation process offers a bridge from isolation to integration, from burden to purpose, from what's wrong with me to what's mine to do. You were born to see, not to fit in with those who refuse sight, but to see clearly and use that vision to serve life's wholeness. Your depth isn't your burden. Your resistance to your depth is your burden. You're not too much for this world. You're precisely what this world's transformation demands. The systems that are breaking need people who can see why they're breaking and envision what comes next. The people who are suffering need witnesses who can hold their pain without minimizing it. The future needs architects who can perceive patterns others can't yet see. If Jung's description of the INFJ mirrors your experience, you're part of the 2%. That's not an exclusive club. It's a distributed network of seers who've always existed at the margins, holding the tension between what is and what could be, seeing the shadows that others deny and the possibilities that others can't imagine. Share below which stage describes your journey right now. Are you the confused empath, just realizing you're different? The conscious outcast, suffering your isolation? The disillusioned mystic, ready to stop hiding? Or the integrated seer, learning to use your gifts without burning yourself out? Subscribe for deeper explorations of Jung's insights into personality, shadow work, and the individuation process. Ready for more? Watch my video on Jung's concept of the shadow and how facing what you've rejected about yourself becomes the path to wholeness. Thank you for being here. Until we meet again in the depths.